Welcome to Markigy, the science of marketing strategy, a bi-weekly podcast where all the cool marketers discuss their favorite marketing strategies, study by study. On this show, we feature marketing risk takers who believe long-term wins for the customer equal long-term wins for the business too. How? Human-led marketing, the combination of where science, creativity, and strategy meet, or as we also like to call it, Markigy. Let's break down the marketing trends, myths, and methodologies together. I'm your host, Leanne Dowweimer. Let's go. On this episode of Markigy, I'm joined by Braeden Matson-Jones, Performance Marketing Manager at Refine Labs, B2B demand generation and pipeline optimization expert, and a paid media consultant. He will share how customer-focused strategies fit into and dramatically improve performance marketing, and supporting how customers buy now. We'll discuss how to measure the impact of marketing in a way that makes sense instead of MQLs for the sake of MQLs. I will come back to the true purpose of marketing, which is helping to benefit the business's revenue and functionality. Let's dive in. Hi, I'm Leanne with Markigy. I am here today with Braeden Matson-Jones, who is with Refine Labs, and he has a ton of great experience that he's going to share with us. So just to get it started, can you tell us a little bit about your background?
For sure. So, hello everyone. It's awesome to be here, and thank you, Leanne, for having me on. So, I got into this space a little over 5 years at this point. I originally I did an intensive full-time diploma at a school in Vancouver and basically got right into the industry. And so up to this point, I've been in-house and multiple different agencies. I've started my own dropshipping stores and stuff like that. And so I like to say that I've kind of touched every area briefly of digital marketing, if that makes sense. And so, as Leanne said, I'm currently at Fine Labs as a performance marketing manager. I'm stoked to dive into some of our topics today.
Thank you so much for joining me. When we met, you told me about how you like to make sure the strategy that you're using matches the tactics, especially with performance marketing. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of different things to call out here. I mean, the first is that there in B2B marketing in particular, I think there is in all marketing, obviously we want to be able to know or say with a high degree of confidence that marketing is working. And I think what that often does is incentivizes tactics that are measurable as opposed to incentivizing tactics that we believe are the most likely to work first. And so that's potentially another higher level conversation. But to me, what this boils down to is when we're thinking about whether it's paid media or an organic content strategy, whatever tactic you are executing on has to be evaluated with KPIs. Number one, that actually are tiable to that tactic. In other words, you're able to measure them with a KPI that is actually influenceable directly by that tactic. And then number two, KPIs that actually make sense, which follow from that. So for example, if you are running a lead gen campaign, getting, webinar downloads or something, which I wouldn't tend to recommend for the most part, but if that is the goal of the tactic, then the way you measure that has to be in line with that. Like you wouldn't measure a webinar lead gen campaign on engagement. You might use engagement as a proxy, but whatever that is. And so another example might be brand awareness, or if your goal is to educate a ICP segment about something to do with your product, then you should be measuring that with KPIs that align with that. So things like engagement and reach and CPM, and are we reaching the right people, essentially?
Yeah, definitely reaching the right people is the goal. There's there's lots of goals beyond that, but what is the number one reason this doesn't work for other people? Like the strategies that you use are pretty effective. But when you see somebody else try to do your strategy, but for some reason it falls flat, what do you think the number one reason is?
If I had to pick one, I would say it's I'm torn between measurement and consistency, and I'd love to speak briefly, if I can, to both of them. So, I mean, on the measurement side, I alluded to it before, but I'm a firm believer that the best marketing and the marketing that is the most efficient and that works the best over long periods of time is the hardest to measure. And that's because the way that human beings make decisions is nonlinear and complicated and nuanced, especially in the 21st century. And so measuring the impact of marketing is not something that can often be done, particularly in a B2B context, in a straight line where we're able to say down to the dollar, we spent this much on this channel with this tactic and we got this return. And so that's number one. Obviously, we have to measure marketing and we want to be holding marketing accountable to meaningful impacts. But I think the way that that is often done doesn't lend itself to some of the tactics that, like I said, are harder to measure. So that's going to be number one. And number two, as I said, is consistency. And I mean, this one, I think all of us have a varying percentage of shiny object syndrome. It's really easy to get caught up in tools and new tactics and new channels. But the reality is, I think that if you have consistency and discipline on something that you've proven out, that's really the name of the game. But a lot of companies tend to hire a team or a person and then adopt this mindset or mentality that we just need to do a whole bunch of things all at the same time, because that kind of gives the illusion of progress as opposed to going all in on one or two channels and really building those out over time.
Definitely. And then to kind of take that a step further, what what does consistency look like beyond just, length of time? Because part of what I see happening is that there does need to be some evolution. So there's consistency and evolution. How do those two interplay in your mind?
I would see that as a little bit of a feedback loop. So obviously if you're committed to a channel, I think that, like, if you just take, for example, committing to LinkedIn or TikTok or something, and you say to yourself, okay, I'm gonna start posting once a day, and you commit to that and you kind of detach yourself from the immediate outcome. The evolution of the type of content that you put out is going to start becoming informed, and it's going to be related to all of the different signals and the things that you're seeing, what people are commenting on your posts, if you get messages asking you to expand on something, or people just saying, I love this one post, etc. So the refine, we would refer to this as positive signals. When you start executing on a tactic, you're going to start getting some of these signals. And like I said, that could be new connection requests or comments or some of the things that you start observing after you launch a tactic. And those positive signals, or negative signals for that matter, are going to reinforce and start kind of dictating the way that you evolve. So if you find that a certain line of logic or topic or thinking or even content type, video versus text posts, if you find that a certain thing is yielding more of a result that you want consistently, then that's going to morph or going to impact the way that your execution morphs, even right up to the point where if at a certain point you say, I'm done with a certain platform and I want to start focusing on another one for, A, B, C, or D reasons.
Definitely. So there's this idea of avoiding brute force in all campaigns, but also like performance campaigns. And how would you say that, what you were just talking about with, the feedback loops and, taking that feedback and adjusting with it? How would you say that that ties into avoiding brute force?
Yeah, this is a good one. So, place I would start here is I actually think that the changing your mindset, particularly as an executive or a person in charge of leading a marketing team, changing the mindset and your philosophy, and even to an extent, your emotional attachment to tactics is actually kind of the ground floor, if that makes sense. And so I think where it starts is shifting from this perspective that performance marketing, even just by virtue of the fact that performance is in the name, fixes everything, right? It's the sauce that is going to make any meal taste good, which is, of course, just not true. You actually have to have strategy and product market fit and all of the things that go along with that first. And so I think shifting your philosophical perspective, for lack of a better term, and then getting buy-in at the organizational level for making sure that your foundation as as a business, from a business strategy and marketing strategy perspective, is actually there first. And if you don't do this, what'll happen is, whether you're in the leadership position or you're the person on the ground running ads, is you're going to be incentivized to do performance marketing that doesn't work because the context that the performance marketing is sitting in is not conducive to it working, because maybe you don't have proven messaging. Maybe your positioning just sucks, right? Maybe there's a whole slew of reasons why marketing, and I'm using air quotes for people who are listening to this, I'm using air quotes. There's a whole reason, a set of reasons why marketing might not work. And so nailing those down and changing your perspective on what marketing actually is, it isn't just performance marketing, that's a tactic. Changing that first, I think, is absolutely essential.
Definitely. One of the things I've seen personally is people trying to accomplish the wrong set of things for the level people are in their journey with your brand with the wrong tactic, right? So, an example of that would be like brute force in ads when you're trying to just be like convert, 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 and like people just met your brand. They don't know you.
100%.
And that's one way where I see people trying to brute force things. And, there's definitely something there that hard to put into words, but there's so many times where being consistent lets you get past and getting the feedback, consistently doing the action and then evolving with the execution of the action are like friends and teammates on the journey towards reaching the goal. Can you think of some clear examples in your recent work where, just someone trying to make something happen when it's not in the right framework where that occurred, and how you helped shift it to be in the right framework, or a conversation that kind of turns the tide in the right direction?
Yeah, so I think what I'll lean on here, just for the reasons of not calling out explicit
Right.
customers that we work with, but one of the really great things about being on the refined team is that, at the moment we work with like 60 plus or so high growth B2B SaaS companies. And so a lot of the the data that we gather from that gets published in what we're called the vault. And so we actually have access to a lot of these trends and standardized data that we're seeing across the organization. And so I would answer this from a broad perspective to say that in almost invariably with every customer that we work with, this conversation comes up, because often what happens is you have a marketing department or team that is not hitting goals, or revenue is stagnant, or companies are just not 100% sure how to execute on, they know that they want demand gen, they just don't know what that looks like. And so what we see, and this is something that you get access to via the vault, as I said, we're publishing a lot of this stuff, but I
Yeah.
mean, generally what we see, we look at quarter over quarter revenue impact, as well as other highly meaningful things like ad CAC and ad CAC payback. That's what we look at, and we evaluate that. We like to evaluate that on quarterly basis. And there's countless examples that we have that I can't name by
Yeah.
name, unfortunately, just
Don't.
given the relationship there. People will understand that, I think. But countless examples where we look at, okay, here's where you started. And then particularly for customers, I have one in mind, I wish I could name them, but who, if you just, they've been with us for so long that we get a lot of quarterly data, and the graph is up and to the right, not to an extent where we're seeing, 500% quarterly over quarterly growth. I think a big part of this conversation is setting realistic goals, but it with consistency and doing the right things with focus and clarity over time. Marketing is a long-term play, and when we make this switch from purely lead gen to, might do some lead gen, but largely a demand focused, cohesive tactical execution, and then measure that over long periods of time, that's where we really see the impact. But again, like I said, it always starts with philosophical alignment. If that's not there, whether you're working with a third party or internally, if you don't have that alignment with stakeholders, it's just not.
No, it's definitely not. And then to remind everybody, if you don't know who or what Refine Labs is that it is a demand gen agency. Could you tell us more about, because I think that helps people understand that companies, like why they would come to Refine Labs and how that intersects with the work that you do.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you for allowing the plug. But this has been a very recent evolution for us. And so if you know Chris Walker, he started back in 2019 on LinkedIn. And so Refine Labs is really this large progressive evolution. And so now where we are is essentially we work with companies to fundamentally operationalize and implement and make more efficient your revenue engine. And we're thinking about this fundamentally now as revenue R&D. And so this has been Chris's brainchild over the last little while. And we're finally really putting that into fruition in a way that makes a lot of sense to executives, because the piece here is that companies spend a lot of money on product R&D, ideally, but I mean, most B2B companies do research and development for making their product better, but nothing on revenue research and development, which is really this operational framework of what are the things that we know are working, and what is the framework for getting from beginning to fully integrated. And so that's really what our mission as Refine Labs is to fundamentally change the way B2B companies think about and go to market. And there's a set of other offerings and things that I'm not going to speak to now, because we're not here to just sell Refine Labs, but people
no, but
let it go there.
For sure. And I just wanted to bring it up because the way
100%.
that you go about performance marketing within the context of a demand gen agency is going to be different than your stereotypical, like, just ad agency. There's so many. There's so many. And they all
It's
do
kind
it.
of ridiculous, eh?
It's amazing.
Everyone has an agency.
Newspapers have agencies, right? Like, it's literally everyone. And, there's so many ways to go about it, but there's not so many ways to win at it. And there's just a lot of money spent. So, thinking of like ways that people can incorporate the context of platforms and where someone's at in their buyer's journey to capture that demand, what are some ways that you approach that?
Yeah, I love this, because I'm the reason I'm at Refine in the first place is because, I mean, we have this term, the MQL hamster wheel, which is, as a marketer, any marketers listening to this, even if you've never heard this, you know exactly what I mean. And I've been in that seat where in other agency past lives, where we have a client and we create the ebook and we promote it on LinkedIn, optimize for downloads, and then those immediately go to the sales team so that those downloads can get sold by a sales team to people who aren't ready to buy because they probably never even read the thing, right? And so this MQL hamster wheel is this sensation of being measured on something that ultimately maps in a way that is fractionally above useless to revenue, right? To the thing that actually matters to the business. And so the way that we think about this at Refine from a demand generation, kind of going from the broad like revenue R&D down to the demand gen from a tactical perspective, we think about platforms and the content on the platforms as needing to be native and congruent with one another, which is why, we do use Google search, right, in a way to capture demand, right? We think about demand creation channels and demand capture channels, and demand creation channels are places where people go to connect and learn new things and maybe even just see pictures of their family's cats, or if you're on LinkedIn, find new connections, learn about whatever is happening with your connections, education, whatever that is. And then demand capture channels are places where demand has been created outside of Google, right? Like if for the most part you go to Google to search for something you want, you might have a really high level query in mind when you don't really know what you're looking for. But for the most part, you go to Google because you have something in mind that you're after. And that demand has been created elsewhere. You go to Google or Bing or G2 or whatever it is, and you look for that thing itself. And then that's where the demand gets captured. And so that's kind of the broad distinction that we use between the types of channels. And then the way we like to use paid media is to educate our ICP in feed. So our customers ICP in feed with information that is necessary for those people to make a buying decision. So if we have a customer who's, let's say, selling mostly to CFOs, it's what does this product do for CFOs that is compelling enough that CFOs purchase the product for the organization? And then, all the parameters like employee count and industry and geo, right? But so all those parameters plus the content strategy comes down to what are the things that are most important for CFOs to know about us? And the framework that I like to use here is kind of, if we're starting at the highest level of kind of, I guess you could say, problem awareness, category awareness, solution awareness, and then actual company awareness. And depending on where our customer sits in the market in their category, you could create content to educate and inform based on each of those. But really, like what at the zoomed out 10,000 foot view, it's a matter of communication at scale with people who care about the things you're communicating at the ad level, and then evaluating ad performance based on specific KPIs, and then evaluating marketing as a team sport. I like to think about marketing as a team sport on team level outcomes. Just like you don't evaluate a goalie on team level outcomes. That's silly. You evaluate a goalie on goalie level outcomes, and you evaluate the team on, well, are they winning championships, right?
Yeah, and that was definitely one of my biggest frustrations as a freelancer and micro agency owner, was that like I would do everything I could on one channel, and my client would want that to directly impact revenue. And I had to say to them, like, look, I can send them to your website. I can send them to call you. But if no one answers, or if your website is not going to convert, that's on you. I can't be measured on what the rest of the funnel looks like if you don't have a funnel in place, or a flywheel, or a process, or
Mhm.
something that answers this need and can capture it. I can do everything I can do at the top of the funnel, or, I can try to capture it in the middle of the funnel, but you have to have the other pieces. It doesn't exist in a vacuum. And so on that note, looking at it, marketing as a team sport, which I love because, there's just so many sports analogies that I could do. Oh, I love it. Without taking that too far. Uh, what do you think the future of marketing, and, especially with the kind of part of the T that you're in, the paid performance, what do you think the future is? What's it look like? What should it look like?
Ooh, is verse ought distinction there. Well, in terms of where I think we're going from maybe I'll answer it kind of from a broad and then specific to paid media perspective. So from a broad perspective, I mean, we're already kind of there, and I think it's just going to get more and more, which is creator led marketing, as opposed to kind of this, we post on our LinkedIn company page, why does no one like our content? Secret, because it sucks. But I think
Because it's a
moving from
company page.
because no one cares about things that you're saying. Sorry to break it to you, but I think that we're moving from really that kind of very, very, if we're thinking, the Mad Men era of very kind of corporate focused, which there's still a large extent of that, but the reality is with social media, we have much more of a creator-led kind of marketing, a creator community-led marketing that we are seeing now, and I think that's only going to continue amplifying. And so that's kind of the broad perspectives. Maybe that's a little vague for people, but I think if you're on LinkedIn at all, you'll know what I'm talking about, right? I mean, people engage with creators and specific people before they tend to engage with companies, just because we're human beings, and I think we tend to engage more with other human beings as opposed to conglomerates first if we have the choice, right? That's kind of number one. The community and people is only going to get greater or have a bigger impact. And then from a paid media, or I guess we could say tactical perspective, I think it's just going to continue to get harder to measure things very specifically at the microscopic level. I don't know if it's the hardest it is now, but I can't see it getting easier, just simply because privacy tends to get more strict, which is a good thing. Let me be clear for all of us, but privacy laws tend to continue to make it harder for marketers to measure things, which again is good for all of us. And channels continue to increase. The number of platforms where people are continues to go up and to the right. And so I think the number of places where people are, combined with how hard it is to measure people's activities on those channels and that influence on revenue, that I think is going to continue to get harder. So that's kind of at the specific level. And then, the metaverse is going to get thrown in here at some point. I don't know how I feel about it, but that's inevitable, I'd say.
Yeah, I think the metaverse is a whole thing that we could talk forever about.
Yeah.
But I think that, you really touched on a couple things there that I want to highlight, is that the number of platforms are going to niche down. Like, you're going to be able to see who your people are based on what platform they're using and how they're using that platform. And I feel like that might become a substitute for some of that conversion data that we're after. I, as a consumer, especially appreciate privacy laws.
Yes.
As a marketer, I appreciate privacy laws, but, wouldn't it be nice? But that being said, there's still no such thing as the perfect attribution model. There never
Um,
will be. We should just be
I,
psychic. That's my vote, is
yeah,
psychic attribution.
100% preaching to the choir. And that's really, really important to hone in on, especially for executives who potentially haven't spent a lot of time in the weeds or in the platform. Like, you will never get a perfect picture of what is driving revenue, customer acquisition down to the dollar. And so the question that you have to answer is, how much accuracy do we want to sacrifice at the altar of good marketing? Because again, at the end of the day, the world-class marketing is hard to measure, because world-class marketing communicates with real people in a meaningful way, and communicating in a meaningful way is hard to measure. And so it really just comes down to a choice that you have to make as a business leader. I'm not saying don't measure things. We have to measure
You
things. We're a fan
have
of
to
hybrid
measure things.
attribution. Yes, you do, and you should. But it just comes down to, okay, well, how are we going to adopt or change our measurement model? A lot of B2B companies are still stuck in the 90s. Like, how are you going to change it to account for the way that people buy stuff and make decisions today?
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, it goes back to that MQL hamster wheel, right? Just because you're optimizing for clicks, if those people don't convert, then you're just getting a wide swath of people that are just entering and leaving. They're just churning. They aren't even completing the journey. And so I feel like we could also talk about that one forever. But that's the cool thing, I think, about the future of marketing, is there's going to be so many exciting aspects to it. And we're really going to see that holistic interplay between departments and channels and tactics and strategies and human-centric marketing, right? That's what I'm about, at least, is that you don't know your people, then what are you doing?
Well, it's mind-blowing how many companies kind of say that they're buyer-centric, yet it's like, okay, how do you know that this ICP segment is actually the ICP? How do you know that the things that you're saying in ads and paying for from a messaging perspective, how do you know those people actually care about that? And often it's just, well, it's our best guess. Like, I'm so obsessed with get the foundation right first, like reason from first principles. Advertising doesn't fix. It's not the Band-Aid you can just like slap on not having positioning.
And if it is the Band-Aid that you're choosing, please experiment with it. Please have A and B tests. Please have like a wide swath of things that you can evolve forward with. If
100%.
that's your chosen way to do it, and sometimes you have to be scrappy.
That's true.
You've got to make stuff happen. You can't sacrifice cash flow to wait until you know everybody perfectly, because the perfect strategy is the one that's done. Right, because
Yeah.
if you have a perfect strategy and it's sitting on a shelf, it's useless. So there is that transition, that interplay that I really want to emphasize, because I care very strongly about it. That you can do both. There is that interplay, and just make stuff happen, make people happy, figure out what they like, and then be ready for it to change, because everything's always changing.
That's a great summation.
Awesome. I don't think I have any more questions for you, but I definitely appreciate your time. If someone wanted to get in contact with you, or they wanted to continue the conversation further, what are some ways they can reach out to you?
Yeah, so bar none, the best place is LinkedIn. So I'm probably, respect to my parents for naming me Braeden in like the weirdest possible spelling. So love you, mom and dad, but what were you doing? So if you just, my point there is I'm probably the only Braeden who's spelled this way, but I could be wrong. LinkedIn, I accept all connection requests. Just please don't pitch slap me, or I will not reply. But I'm always down to come on a show or have a chat, or if you have problem you're struggling with, hit me up. I don't bite, again, unless you pitch slap.
Unless you pitch that. And then, so that if people are only listening, it's spelled Braeden,
Correct.
and then Matson-Jones. I'm Leanne Dowweimer, fellow hyphenate. And if you have any questions, or you want to hear something else talked about on this podcast, feel free to reach out to me, also on LinkedIn. Or you can email me at leanne@markigy.com, LEANNE@MARK, wow. MARKIGY.com. I've been using it for 5 years, and today is the day I can't spell it. This has been an episode of Markigy, and I hope that you will join us more in the future. You've been listening to Markigy, the science of marketing strategy. If any of the strategies we talked about today inspired you to learn more, try them. Remember, the perfect strategy doesn't exist, only the one that gets done. Subscribe to our show on your favorite podcast player to make sure that you never miss an episode. Thanks for listening. Until next time.